Well, based on my last video about why you shouldn't buy a vintage guitar, that video performed pretty well, and I think you guys would enjoy a video about why you should buy a vintage guitar. My name is Cole Townsend, and personally, I love vintage guitars. Right here, as you can see, I have my 1979 Gibson Les Paul Custom in the Tobacco Sunburst finish. This guitar was my absolute dream guitar, and I saved up for months just to be able to afford this thing. But what's this one over here? This guitar behind me is my 1987 Kramer F6000. It's an 80s super strat that looks 80s, sounds 80s, and feels 80s. This thing absolutely rips, and I love this guitar to death. Now that I've shown you guys the vintage guitars that I own, let's get into some reasons about why you should own one. Now to start off, because there was some controversy in the last video, what I consider to be a vintage guitar is any guitar that's about 20 years old or older. There's a few people in the comments in my last video saying that this guitar wasn't vintage, even though it's 45-ish years old. That doesn't make any sense to me, but that's okay. But because there are so many years to choose from with all of the vintage guitars that have been out throughout the years, there's a lot more options you can get as compared to the guitars that are out now. For example, I don't think there are any new Les Pauls that happen to have maple necks with a volute. And that's part of why I love these Norland era Les Pauls, is they have the maple necks with a volute. They do have a few Les Pauls now that have volutes, but they're not the same as the big fat 70s ones, nor do they have the maple necks. They have mahogany necks, which isn't a bad thing, it's just something that is different, and that's why I wanted this guitar. Another good thing about there being so many guitars to choose from is that the search for the right guitar for you is a lot of fun, and it's not an easy search. It took me quite a while to find this guitar in specific because I was looking for the perfect one for me, the perfect one for my budget, the perfect one in terms of what I wanted, and eventually I found this one and I bought it. With new guitars, you kind of just get what you get. Now that's definitely not a problem, that's a very good thing, but the search for a very specific guitar that is exactly to your taste is a lot of fun. The amount of time I spent on Reverb looking for this guitar is absolutely insane. And the amount of time I'm spending on Reverb right now looking for a new Telecaster is even more insane. Right now I'm logging onto Reverb at least twice a day to find the perfect guitar to add to my collection. And right now the guitar I'm looking for is a Fender Telecaster that has been beat up. It could be a custom shop, it could be vintage, but the point is I'm spending a lot of time and a lot of fun searching for that perfect guitar for me, and that's what makes looking for a vintage guitar a lot of fun. And once you have found the vintage guitar for you, you might experience the same thing that I experienced with these two guitars, and that is that they are super inspiring to play. Whenever I pick up either one of these guitars, especially this one, I can't just sit down and not play it. I'm not exactly sure how long the video has been so far, but I've been recording for over 11 minutes, and that's partly just because every time I finish a thought of me saying something, I just start ripping on the guitar. Maybe not ripping, but trying to solo. Something about these older vintage guitars, and it might just be a placebo, who knows, but these guitars just really inspire me to play different things. And that brings me to honestly one of the best things about this guitar in particular, and both of these guitars, is and this has nothing to do with just vintage guitars, this is any guitar, but any guitar that just makes you want to play is a good guitar. It doesn't have to be vintage. It doesn't have to be brand new. It could be a secondhand guitar that's 3 years old that somebody beat up on a little bit. It doesn't even have to be that great of a guitar. But as long as it makes you want to play, it is a great guitar. Maybe another reason of why these guitars are so inspiring and I love playing them so much is they have a lot of personality to them. Something about just a fat, heavy, old Les Paul that has its issues, or a Kramer guitar it's kind of beat up, that's got a bunch of scratches and dings on it, they just have something to them. They have a level of personality that I just rarely find with new guitars. Now who knows what my opinion will be in 5 years looking on the guitars from now. Let's see if they gain more personality, who knows. It's just something about these old guitars really just make you want to dig into them and attack them and just have a lot of fun with them. They just have that personality that a lot of new guitars just lack. Not all guitars, not all new guitars. A lot of new guitars are great and have plenty of personality, but some of them, they just lack that mojo to them. Next up, and I think this is probably the best thing about vintage guitars, is that they tell a story. Sure, I touched on this in my last video, where sometimes it's cool to be the only owner of a guitar, and nothing's wrong with that. But these older guitars, which a lot of them are more beat up and stuff like that, which is totally okay, with every scratch and ding they have, it tells a story. With an older guitar, you could just tell that it's been places. With every scratch and ding that is on this guitar here, you could tell this guitar's just been played a lot. The neck is kind of missing some of that finish, it's kind of been brought to a shine. This up here, which is very common on these guitars, every one of these little scratches can tell a different story. And I think that's something that's really awesome about these old guitars that new guitars just can't do because they're new. And buying a guitar that has those stories, it's also really cool to be able to add your own story on top of it. Another pro of owning a vintage guitar, and this is definitely personal preference, but I absolutely think that guitars will usually age very well. I think the older a guitar gets, the more beautiful it becomes. Again, that's totally personal preference, but that's just what I think. I have a little bulleted list beneath me, and something I actually didn't write down, which I'm very surprised, is that vintage guitars are usually great investments. Now, not all. Some guitars will just pretty much never go up in price. But for example, this one here. This guitar is a fantastic investment. Is that why I bought this guitar? No. I bought this guitar because it's my dream guitar. It's the guitar I play the most and I love it to death. But that's besides the point. If I wanted to sell this guitar, I could probably sell it right now for a profit. Again, am I going to do that? No, I'm not. But it's something I could do, especially if I wait 20 years. It's going to be worth a lot more than what I paid for it, ideally. That just tends to be how the market decides to go, especially with these older Gibsons. It's not the same for every brand or every model, but that's just kind of how it is. Now take in mind, it usually does take several years in order for that process to take place, but with these Norland era guitars, especially over the last like 3 to 5 years, they have skyrocketed in price. So if you're looking to diversify your investment portfolio, maybe look into some older guitars. But this seems to be everything that I have on this list that I mentioned. I really do think you guys should check out some vintage guitars. They do have a feel that just some newer guitars a lot of times just don't have. One thing I will say though, is that a lot of these older guitars are a lot more handmade than they are now. And what that means is sometimes you're gonna find some duds. Yeah, that can happen with new guitars too, but it's significantly less common than it was back then. So keep that in mind whenever you're buying a guitar blind online like I did with this. I got very lucky. This guitar is fantastic, and most of them will be. But that's something you're going to have to keep in mind is sometimes duds exist. And if you guys want to see some more reasons about why vintage guitars aren't for you, check out that video I posted last week. So let me know in the comments below if a vintage guitar is good for you. I love these two guitars. They're two of my favorite guitars in my collection. But I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you guys liked it, feel free to click like. And if you loved it and you want to see more content from me, subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.